So I want to talk about insight bodywork and what it really is all about. Quite a bit of what we're going to be doing today is body work. We're going to lie you down in a little while and we're going to scan your body. So we're going to look through your body and find out where there are tensions. And the reason why this is important is that we experience life through our bodies and things happen. We might trip over and hurt ourselves. There might be something much more serious than that. And the body responds by automatically protecting itself. And the way it does that is through this system here. And there are layers and layers of this myofascial tissue. It's pretty much what we're made of. And there are layers. If we take all these layers away, there's another layer which runs from the back of the skull right the way down to the tailbone. If we turn the body around, there's all these muscles in front: the hip flexor, the psoas, the pelvic floor, the diaphragm. And these are the protecting, contracting areas that will guard and respond to any adversity by contracting as armoring. And it's not just physical jolts, fights, where we're pushed and pulled around. It's very much around what's going on internally. In other words, what we're thinking about, situations we're in. And I'd like to explain more deeply about that. So all of these tissues connect throughout the whole body, and this is just the fascia itself. And you can see these bands that run all the way through. They cross over, go right the way down to the feet. So there's another system as well that's running through our body, and it's represented by this picture here. And beyond the physical, this is the energetic system, or the electromagnetic system of the body. This is the biofield. And this is what's really important about the biofield. And it explains the other part of what we're really doing today. So the biofield, as you can see here, and there's another more detailed picture underneath, and you can see it's literally this electric current that's running through the body, and then it flows around like a magnet. And it's in every single tissue. It's the electrical system of our body, also referred to as the life force. But here's the really crucial thing about the biofield, which is constantly flowing through the body, and it's this. Electric or electromagnetic means that it's made up of two components. And one, of course, is electrons, which are particles which move. And that, in fact, is thought. So as you think, it's particulate. It's literally a packet of energy. A thought is a packet of energy. And here's the thing. Depending on the type of thought, that packet of energy, or that flow of packets of energy, will generate a magnetic field. What is that magnetic field? That magnetic field is your feelings. And essentially there are two types. Because if the thought is a nice thought or a good thought, a happy thought, then physiologically that thought arises out of specific hormones like dopamine, like oxytocin, like endomorphin. And the good feeling moves and it flows and it maintains this healthy status. So the energy is constantly flowing and this person is in equilibrium, in balance and happy, which is natural, their natural state of being. So where do problems really arise from? Where they really arise from is thoughts which are, you could say, non-serving or an unhappy thought. And the truth is, any thought like that generates the emotion of fear. And fear comes from the hormones cortisol and adrenaline. And the same thing happens. Fear is still magnetized and it still moves. And babies are very, very good at moving that energy, because if they go into fear, then they immediately discharge it by crying. And if they don't get their need met quickly enough, then they discharge even more fear, and they start to scream, and they start to yell, and they start to get angry, and they start to rage. And they're still balancing and they're integrating this energy, this fear, emotion. But what happens is that at some point in our lives, in the early ego development, we start developing an unconscious part of us. And one of the functions of the unconscious is actually to put in what we can't deal with in that moment. So it becomes unconscious or subconscious. Some people might understand it or know it as dissociating. And it's a way of protecting ourselves so that we don't have to feel what we're feeling at that moment. So what is going on with all of us is that we have an unconscious part of us, and 90% is unconscious. And if this is the uncomfortable unconscious part, what we now understand is that, of course, a large part of that is going to be the tension that's in all of those tissues, all of that myofascia. But embedded in that tension is the electromagnetic emotional charge, the fear, in other words, that was generated from whatever non-serving thought came up. But the thing is, rather than flowing through and integrating, what tends to happen is that it doesn't. And so if it gets pushed into the unconscious part of us, if it gets pushed into here, it then accumulates and it builds up. And that's what this is. That's what this is. This is the discomfort. 90% of it is unconscious. And the input of it, a small percentage, are all the actual physical things that have happened to us, accidents and traumas. But 99.9% of it is thought, is non-serving thought. And it's happening all the time, and we don't realize it's happening because it's unconscious. So this is a flow of electrons which builds up. It will show up as tension in the body, and that, of course, is infused with emotional charge, fear emotion, which hasn't been released. And then what happens is, of course, as that builds up, it will impact the mind, and it affects how we're thinking. The more tense we feel, the more we're filled with anxiety, the more we have non-serving thoughts, and around and around and around we go. So there's one more part, because we have a history. We all have a history. And a huge part of that history is how we're impacted by society, and that includes our lineage, our family, the dysfunction in the family, and how it's passed on through the generations. And if we could simplify one archetype trauma that we all go through at some level, at some point, because it's so difficult to escape criticism. And the schooling system brings us into being judged and being measured. And the fear emotion that we experience as the ego, as it's developing, is a sense of it's doing something wrong, it's done something that's wrong, and the emotion is shame. And shame tends to bring up feelings of rejection. So we reject ourselves, we feel rejected. And these are archetype core wounds. Rejection then creates the sense of abandonment. And what happens is that as this is created in our psyche and we're defending it by pushing those fear emotions into the unconscious, and they're really arising out of the shame and the rejection and the abandonment, what happens is that we develop a non-serving or a limiting belief system. And we've all got that wired into our software, into the mind. And the limiting belief is quite simply something is wrong. We just have a program that's running that says there's something wrong, there must be something wrong. Even if we have a pain, we immediately think, what's wrong with me, rather than the truth, which is, my body's signaling that something needs to get better, or that there's an issue there. We go straight into wrong. Somebody gives us a look. What's wrong? What's wrong? Wrong, and it's never enough. It's not enough. And these are the universal, you could say, glitches that every human being has at some level. And it arises out of shame. So this session deeply understands all of this. It understands that you, somewhere in your body, you're going to be holding tension. So we're going to be searching throughout your whole body to find where those tensions are. And then we're going to systematically begin to work through your body so that we can dismantle and begin to release those tensions. But as well as doing that, what we're also doing is going into here. And what I really mean by that is, if as we're working on your body and we're getting you out of here, because that's really important, you'll be thinking much, much less, because part of this process is to go into a theta mind state, where you're a meditative state, where you're thinking less, there's space between your thoughts. And in that meditative state, what we're creating is an opportunity for whatever is in the unconscious to come to the surface, because your psyche wants that. We create situations in our lives so that we can feel what we haven't felt. Our soul doesn't want to hold this. We're here to integrate all of this emotional charge. So as we create this space between thoughts and we're exploring through the body, what might happen is that feelings might bubble to the surface. And here's the thing, the way out is to go through. So what we'll be finding are these, you could call them energy cysts, not necessarily in these places, but the way out is through. So you're going to be supported so that if a feeling comes up, that you meet the feeling, that you allow the feeling and not bypass it, but go through the feeling. And that way, by going through, the way out is through, that way the energy can be dissipated. That way, whatever's here can come out of here. So we're releasing the electromagnetic charge that's stored in the unconscious, that's stored in the myofascial tissues. And that's what Insight Bodywork is all about.